Thank you very much. It's today, after attending Kaushik's session, I can feel that I'm back in the Delhi School of Economics. See, the beauty of Delhi School of Economics is you talk about game theory, Nash equilibrium, evolutionary game theory, asymptotic properties of the two-stage least square estimator. Then you go down and you start talking about plot size and crop productivity, or what has happened to the consumption pattern. So today you're getting a sample of what Delhi School wants to be, has been, and always strives to do. It strides across good theory and some good empirical economics. So today's topic is changing consumption pattern. I will speak at the beginning just for a few minutes, because at the end, after Shamika has spoken, I'm sure you'll have lots of questions and I don't want to say much. So the fact of the matter is India is changing. It's another matter that India is changing not fast enough for our liking. And I think that's good, because aspiration is the stepping stone for achievement. If we are happy what we are doing, then most probably we'll not do better. So, the first question is the consumption pattern changing? So, consumption pattern changes when your income goes up, that you know. When your income doubles, you don't consume twice as much salt. So the first thing you know that the consumption pattern will change. Maybe you'll have more of everything, but in a relative sense, the proportion will change. What is the reason? The reason is income elasticity. As your income goes up, you don't increase consumption in the same proportion for everything, and that you know as good economists, the Engels curve. So that we expect. Second, the other reason can be income distribution. Your income may have gone up twice, my income may have gone up only 1.5 times. So my consumption pattern has changed accordingly, your consumption pattern has changed accordingly, and when you aggregate, you will get some different effect. So income distribution as well as income elasticity, these are the two main determinants of the consumption pattern. Now what we have now is a very important finding, which is the Household Consumption Expenditure Survey. It's done quinquennially, and I hope there'll be some discussion, but not too much. You can the discussion can go on a tangent if you start questioning. I'm not saying it shouldn't be questioned. We should always question. We have had a great statistical tradition in the country. We have had the best statisticians in the world. So you have every right to ask, is this survey correct? What was done? And this becomes particularly controversial because it's supposed to be quinquennial survey, that is every 5 years. The last survey was July 2011 to June 2012. Then there was supposed to be a survey after 5 years. 2017-18 survey was junked for the right or for the wrong reasons by the government on quality issues. So we are having a survey after 10 years. It's very important, and I'm very happy that Shamika is looking at it very carefully. So what have we found? Just the most important findings are rural consumption per capita is 3,773 per year, and urban is 6,459 per year. Now, when you look at this per capita consumption, it helps me, and I think it will help you, if you multiply it by 4 or 5 to get the consumption expenditure of a family. So if a family is becoming 13, 14,000 in the rural areas and something like 24 or 25,000 per year for an urban family. Is it too much? Is it too little? It will never be too much because we want to do better. We want to get beyond this developing stage. Now, a few more important results that have come out. One is the gap. The gap remains between rural and urban, but the gap has narrowed. It was previously 1.8 times, now it's 1.7 times. And the composition has changed, as you would expect. The composition, food has decreased for rural families from about 52-53% to 46%. And in urban families, it has come down from 42-43% to 39%. Welfare schemes, you may ask, welfare schemes, is that having an effect? Yes, it is having an effect because we are finding that the bottom decile consumption has increased more than the top deciles. Now, having said this, the question is, what are the things that we should watch out for? See, when consumption pattern changes, we need to produce more of everything, but more of what is it happening? Now, normally, we would expect that prices should be able to take care of it. When relative prices change, producers will respond. Producers will produce those things that people are demanding. But when you introduce a distortion in it, that means you try to change the artificially, that creates a problem. And here I'll just flag one issue that is politically very charged, but very important. As good economists, you'll understand that is very important. That's the concept of MSP. You know, the minimum support price was introduced when we were ushering in the Green Revolution, and the issue was, how do we increase production? Because the problem was of shortage. We didn't have enough rice and wheat. So the issue was, give them a price at which you'll procure. So this price was determined by some commission, and then often it was superseded by politicians. Even what was it called? It was called CACP, Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices. They calculated something on the basis of cost, family labor, so on, and the political leaders, for political reasons, farmers, as you know, more than half the population is still in rural areas, very dependent on agriculture for income. They used to give a bonus on top of that. At that time, a professor who was not in Delhi School of Economics, but very intimately connected with it. We all grew up in Delhi School of Economics with Professor Dharamnarayan's presence felt. He was in Institute of Economic Growth. He was the first chairman of Costs and Agricultural Costs and Prices. He said that if you fix a price without reference to the demand condition, there will be problems. If you try to export it, if the international price is lower than the price that you have fixed, then you will be exporting subsidies. At that time it was not a concern, but some experts are saying now that with rice and wheat you are also exporting water, which is scarce. And then if you are fixing a price without reference to the international price, the demand conditions, then you may have a problem of not scarcity but surfeit, surpluses. And that You are all young people, young students, but you have seen that problem exists. And mind you, procurement, MSP is not really MSP. As you know or may know, I am now an MLA. So in my area of West Bengal, I find there are lots of farmers who are not being able to sell their rice at the minimum support price. So minimum support price is a very restricted operation in some parts of the country where the political pressure is a lot. Now, as the consumption pattern changes, will agriculture become irrelevant? No. We know now that in a relative sense, the proportion spent on cereals is decreasing. The proportion spent on fruits and vegetables, poultry, meat, that is increasing. But what is increasing fastest is milk and milk products. So what we need to do is to design policies which will shift the production pattern and make it commensurate with the changing consumption pattern. That is a challenge I think you guys have to solve. How you solve it politically, how you solve it economically, in terms of right incentives, because you have seen what has happened when the government tried to change the agricultural laws. Acceptability is extremely important. In a democracy, in a vibrant democracy, you can't just thrust it, especially with a large proportion of the farmers constituting a very powerful political group. They may not sort of sympathize with your view that is good in the long run. They may say in the long run we are all dead. Give us something that we have been getting, and every decision that you take, you may think that you are taking it as a temporary palliative, but whatever you give becomes an entitlement. A subsidy once given, it's very easy to give a subsidy, but it's very difficult to withdraw it. So I won't say any more. I'm sure Shamika has got many important things to tell us. And I'll just again mention that quality of the data, the question of how we can improve these surveys, those questions will remain. But along with that, we must focus on what the survey has found, what changes we are seeing, and how do we respond to them. Thank you very much. With these words, I'll request Shamika to.
Namaskar. First of all, this is homecoming. I cannot tell you how many wonderful memories and some very frightening ones we experienced. But it's a new school in the sense this room actually has air conditioning. It looks like a professional lecture theatre. It is a professional lecture theatre. The whole building seems to have completely modernized. I'm seeing a placement cell here. Dr. Pamidua is here somewhere, and she actually set up the placement cell. The first batch that benefited was the one right after ours. So I think we have seen some degree of revolution happen within this institution over the last 27 years now since I graduated. So thank you very much, Dr. Ram Singh, for this opportunity. As my chair, Dr. Lahiri, introduced, I am going to get a little bit into the weeds, simply first of all because we have this rich data set with us. I come at it from various angles because this truly is extremely rich data set, and it's going to inform many aspects of policy making in the country. I will focus primarily on agriculture and overwhelmingly on health outcomes. This is joint work with Professor Mudit Kapoor at ISI, who happens to be my better half, whom I met right here in the lecture theatre downstairs many, many years back. So this school has very fond memories of all kinds. So first of all, I want to introduce you to the fact that this round of NSS is almost 2.5 times the size of the previous round that we are going to compare it with, that they are comparable. Because there is interest in data quality, and as Dr. Lahiri also introduced, I will spend 5 minutes at the end. As some of you might be aware, I have been raising issues and writing about data quality as well, because we are at a phase in our growth where we need better estimates, we need more real-time estimates and so on, and those are the sort of the public writings. Of course, they're all founded on research. So I will introduce you to some of the issues that I've been concerned with. But let's very quickly go over the broad changes. First of all, massive changes in terms of the monthly per capita consumption expenditure, right? Almost 160% rural, 147% urban. That's the kind of change we have seen. And it is not confined to a few states of the country. This change is seen all over. So this presents basically across all our states massive increases in the monthly per capita consumption expenditure. This is for the urban areas, again very big. Something is happening in Sikkim. If there's anyone from Sikkim, that is it has increased from 2,608 rupees to 12,000, more than 12,000. So clearly these are incredible magnitude, and I'm very interested in seeing what's happening in some of these pockets, but overwhelmingly big growth. But we really want to understand more. Beyond these large numbers, we want to understand how are these proportions changing? Because now with this kind of growth in consumption expenditure, is it similar to what it was 10 years back, or are there changes? Well, there are big changes, and some of the trends which pertain to, which will feed into policy making. In the rural areas of the country, first of all, we are seeing a decline in the proportion of monthly per capita consumption expenditure on cereals. Households used to spend 11% of their monthly consumption expenditure on cereal. That number is down to 5%. So that's a massive decline. What we are seeing in terms of increase is processed and packaged food, right? It has undergone a big increase. What we are also seeing is a major increase in conveyance. So improvements in road, and by the way, this data is for rural. In rural India, 4% was spent on conveyance 10 years back. Today, that number is 7%. So you're seeing a massive increase. Remember, overall consumption expenditure is rising, but as a share for households to be spending so much more on conveyance means that, of course, there are issues of mobility. The burden on households is now increasing. Quite worryingly, we are also seeing a major increase in consumption expenditure on pan, tobacco and intoxicants, right? And please appreciate we're getting to health outcomes, so I'm particularly interested. Households used to spend 2% on pan, tobacco and intoxicants 10 years back. Today that number is up to 5%, right? So there is a massive increase that is happening. This happens to be the case not just for rural but for urban areas as well. In fact, for urban areas, conveyance has increased to 9%. Cereals has decreased from 7 to 4%. Right? Processed food again has increased to 8%. So these changes are happening across the country. If we look at the bottom 50%, and for those of you interested in data analytics and graphics, these are Sankey charts which help you sort of give you the various components to these changes. The bottom 50%, quite worryingly, is seeing again a big increase in terms of pan, tobacco and intoxicants. There is a decline in cereals from 14% to 6%. In terms of processed food, again, it has increased. Similarly for urban households. Now this data set, and I really encourage the younger researchers who are interested in these this is one of the richest data sets I've seen globally. This has about 174 food items. Of course, there are many subgroups, etc. But one can do a lot with it. If you look at in terms of the proportion of the monthly per capita consumption going on food, this is the first time in modern India that we are seeing an average household spend less than 50% on food. So this is a marker of progress, right, and development. What you're seeing, this is for rural, it has declined again in all states. Some states remarkably, look at Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, look at Andhra, Madhya Pradesh. In all these areas, we are seeing the decline is massive. We are also seeing this in the smaller states. In urban India also the decline, in fact now it is 42% of your monthly per capita consumption expenditure is going towards food. So this is of course please note that there will be impact on the way we estimate the CPI and future implication for what is happening when food becomes a smaller share and what else should now be part of the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. If you're looking at urban, again, the decline is actually, some of the biggest decline is happening in the poorest parts of the country. UP, you look at Bihar, West Bengal, so on. What about the poorest 20%? So the poorest quintile, the decline is again quite severe, and again happening in some of the poorest states of the country. This is also an urban phenomenon, meaning the poorest 20% for urban India. Now, if we look at the decomposition, the top 5 bars are for 10 years back, 2011-12, the bottom 5 bars are for this most recent round, and the red bars are cereals. Are you seeing that cereal proportion is decreasing, not average on the whole, but across quintile groups? You're seeing that for the poorest to the richest, every segment, every consumption class in India is now spending significantly less on cereals. What you're seeing is a consecutive increase in the white part of the histogram, which is milk and milk product, and very worryingly, well, it's not worrying because we have to decompose it, it's worrying for me because of the larger health implication for processed and packaged food. That is the olive green segment, that is the biggest increase that you are seeing. So there are huge implications for public health. This is a rural as well as an urban. In fact, today, the top 10% of the urban population is spending more than 27% of their monthly per capita consumption expenditure on packaged food. Right? Now, if we look at the changes across, when we say per capita, we are looking at the family size. But from a public health perspective, family size where, let's say, there are 5 adult male and 2 adult female is not the same as 5 adult female and 2 male. Right? So, in the health literature, there is something called adult female equivalent based on the energy requirement, and you also look at the family, if they have children below 2 years, then the energy requirement is more. You make an equivalent comparison so that family sizes are not treated as a black box. You can actually get into the details. Now, this analysis has 2 segments. The left side is talking about the proportion of the households that reported consuming some fresh fruits. All right. The blue bars are how much, and this is the beauty of the NSS, that you're not just looking at the expenditure part of it, you're actually looking at in terms of kilogram per capita, how much are people eating. So as you note on the left side panel, on an average, 76% households used to report consuming some kind of fresh fruits. That number is now above 94%, right? If you look at it across quintile group, you see 10 years back, in the poorest 20%, 60% households used to consume some form of fresh fruits every month. Today, that number is close to 90%. So you're seeing there is a massive increase, and it's happening across the quintile groups. What about how much is being consumed? 10 years back, 1.9 kilogram per month per capita was being consumed. Today, that number is up to 2.7. kilogram per capita. So there is a big shift. And some of the biggest shifts have happened in the bottom quintile. 0.8 kilogram has increased to 1.5. You are seeing this for fresh fruits for urban as well as rural. You are seeing this for milk and milk product. You're seeing big changes, but the biggest changes are at the bottom quintile. In fact, the bottom quintile, 2.2 liter used to be consumed per month. Now it is 3.2 liter per capita. So there is a massive increase in terms of actual consumption amount. You're seeing this in the case of eggs, fish and meat across quintile classes. Again, for the bottom, it is higher. In terms of cereal, and this is where there is a lot of unpackaging to do because there are many policies that have been, schemes that have been running. First of all, in terms of proportions consuming, you almost have 100%. Everybody consumes some form of cereal or the other. But if you look at the quantity, this is only giving you quantity. 10 years back, an average household average person used to consume 10.8 kilogram per month. That number is down to 8.7. So you have a 2 kilo per month decline per person. Please note the magnitude of the decline in the actual consumption. So this has direct bearing on a lot of our agriculture policy as well, right? Because our MSPs are also overwhelmingly focused on cereals. A lot of our agriculture policy up till date has been largely focused on cereals, and this changing consumption pattern will therefore have deeper implications. If you look at just in terms of the urban households, 9.4 kilos per person, it is down to 7.7. Now, please note just the magnitude of it, and it's happening across quintile group. Even the poorest segment is to consume 8.8. Today, it is down to 7.2. So cereal consumption on the whole across consumption classes, across sectors is declining. What about the poorest 20% and why are we interested? A lot of our policies focus on the poorest. And this data actually allows us to do this, which is help states identify where is poverty concentrated even within the state. Right? So this is an example of UP and Bihar. We know that the highest probability of finding the poorest are concentrated in some regions of the state. The state is not uniform in terms of poverty distribution, so we cannot treat states the same. In fact, NSS has something called NSS regions, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. If you look at Tamil Nadu and Kerala, again, you have concentration of poverty in some areas, not the others. For the poorest segments, again, across the states, in fact, consumption of fresh fruits, look at Jharkhand, 20% of the poorest had reported some consumption of fruits. That number is above 50% today. Right? Punjab, 25, that number is 84% today. So massive changes happening at the lowest rung of the consumption classes. Again, urban and rural, the same story for egg, fish and meat. Urban and rural. Milk product. In fact, this graph is stark because Chhattisgarh, 10 years back, monthly per capita consumption expenditure, if you look at, or the proportion of bottom 20%, 1% of the poorest 20% in Chhattisgarh had reported consuming some milk and milk product, 1%. That number today is above 41%. So these are big changes, and the changes are not only from the demand side in terms of changing pattern. This is also extremely strongly correlated with what's happening at the back end in terms of the supply chain. Now the remotest parts of the country, and you will see the biggest increase happen in these kind of perishable items, fruits and milk, and happening, in fact, the biggest growths are seen in the poorest parts of the country. Same for urban. What else can you do with this data? You can look at seasonality. Meaning, how does average consumption change over months of the year? We can do this for all segments, again, consumption classes. We look at an additive model. We use random effects. I know this is the only hall where I will even mention random effects. Usually no one is interested in those back end. But the paper, this is a forthcoming EAC paper. It's very methodologically heavy because we also look at Bayesian estimates for a lot of these things. What is happening? This is an interesting graph. The left-hand side is telling you proportion of households that are consuming fresh fruits. What do you notice? Across the 12 months, there is great variation. In fact, the highest consumption, 77% households have reported some fresh fruits in the summer month. But in the winter month, that number is down to 55%. What you notice is the next one is telling you the latest numbers, 22, 23. Do you realize that the seasonality is has reduced significantly? So the kind of monthly, the seasonal variations in consumption is coming down largely on behalf of what is happening to the supply chain. In fact, fresh fruits and vegetables in the latest agriculture report tells us that the gross value added for fruits and vegetables is much higher than cereals in India. The right side panel tells us the quantity of consumption. Again, if you look at the variation, it has declined significantly from 1.92 to 1.48, which is the highest to the lowest. Same story for urban, same story for milk and milk product, urban and rural. Now let me get to the main theme of what I'm getting into. Why am I interested in all of this? Because I'm interested in micronutrient analysis. What the NIN and the ICMR tell us is that each food item, what is the micronutrient content? Right? And here I'm going to focus on iron, though the report looks at 6 different things, iron, zinc, vitamin A, folate, etc. I will focus mostly on iron. This is telling us what is the average intake of rural households and urban households. The pink bars are telling us what is the average intake of iron if you include cereals. So if you include cereal, 9.9 micrograms of iron is getting consumed by an average Indian if you include cereals in the food basket, in the plate. But if you exclude cereal, then that consumption is down to 4.5 microgram. Across the quintile groups, what you are seeing is the pink bars are much more, which tells you that for all segments of the Indian consumption class, cereals are the main source of iron. Therefore, now we understand and appreciate why universal this fortification which is being attempted. Right? Cereal becomes a very important segment or source of iron. It's true for rural, it is true for urban. Interstate variation tells us something extremely interesting, that while on an average 9.9 microgram of iron intake is there, Rajasthan, an average household in Rajasthan consumes 16.4 microgram per day if you include cereal. It's right at the top, Rajasthan. But if you remove cereal from the basket or the plate, then Rajasthan falls to the bottom with only 2.4 microgram. It tells you in the Rajasthani diet, and that's why a lot of these nutrition policies, a lot of these health policies will have to get fine-tuned to the dietary diversity and the kind of food that is being eaten. Because you're seeing repeatedly the kind of efforts that are being made for anemia, stunting, etc., etc. We are not seeing the commensurate improvements in outcomes the way we would like to. Right? And now this data is allowing us, this analysis is meant to understand this problem a little deeper. So Rajasthan 16.4 microgram with cereals, 2.4 microgram. In fact, it falls from top to the bottom for both rural and urban, with and without cereal. This tells us something very interesting. First of all, this is exactly the same story if you look at the poorest 20% as well. Right? It's not just in all India, it's the case with the poorest classes. Now, why are we interested in this? Because the diversity on the plate is very critical. And this is where we introduce or we use the concept of Shannon Diversity Index, meaning how diverse is a plate from one state to the other. Then we will go to NSS regions also. Because state and union territory, you have 35 observations, but when you go to the NSS regions, and Dr. Narayan is here who has excellent work on NSS region, you have 84. So the observations increase and you're able to say things with greater degree of clarity. Shannon Diversity Index really just looks at what is the diversity. Right? So you multiply the share of the source of the micronutrient with the log share of the micronutrient. And this is what you get in terms of different quintile groups, how much iron intake is there. Look at the richest. The richest, of course, there is a difference if you just look at the averages. But what I want this group here to take away is, even for the richest quintile, there is a distribution. Which means the richest quintile group also has a strong left tail. Richest segment of India has enough number of households which are deficient, which are taking very little iron. So now think of it, for me the interest is from a policy perspective. How do you design policy now? Do you look at averages? Because if you continue focusing on the average, we are not going to see that degree of success. Or do we now look at the distribution as a whole? Right? So even the richest segments have huge deficiency in terms of intake. This is the daily intake. What about diversity on the plate? There is tremendous diversity. Of course, the richer households have greater diversity. This is just the mapping of the Shannon Diversity Index. And the bottom have a little less, but again, great degree of variation. Don't just look at averages. And in fact, this is one of the criticism of an earlier JDE paper we had written almost 10 years back. It was an outcome of a randomized controlled trial. Eventually that paper started getting treated as a critique of randomized controlled trial, that we cannot treat it as a gold standard. One of the reasons is we are so fascinated and overwhelmingly focused on averages that we forget the distributions. And distribution tells you that there are many households or many beneficiaries who lose out because of a certain intervention. There are many who will gain a lot more. So we really have to look at the distributions if we are looking at serious policy implications of this. How does this matter? Because if you look at, and I'm giving you an example of 3 states, Kerala, Uttar Pradesh and Rajasthan. What are the different sources of iron for people across states of India? So this is looking at the dietary diversity source. In Kerala, 40% of the iron comes from fresh fruits. While in Uttar Pradesh, 70% of the iron comes from cereal. While in Rajasthan, 84% of iron comes from cereals. Do you see the variation in terms of sources of basic micronutrients? So there is great degree of variation. In fact, in Kerala, I grew up there. Every household definitely has a coconut tree. There is also easily available bananas of all kinds. Steamed plantain is one of the most common, even the poorest households get access to that. So imagine access is as important, that we are so fixated sometimes on the demand side of the story that yes, we have more income, we have greater amount of we can afford, but there is also a supply side to the story, which tells you these variations across states. What about prevalence anemia? Now we are going to marry this data set with the NFHS 5 data, which gives us prevalence of anemia. And what do we find? This is for children, by the way. We look at the prevalence of anemia across states, and we are going to see the average intake of iron, and then we look at the dietary diversity on the plate. Right? This is the first regression result for children. What you have here is a distribution of the coefficient. The yellow distribution is the coefficient from the dietary diversity. The blue is from the dietary intake, daily intake. What you see is that anemia is more strongly negatively correlated with the diversity. So more diverse the plate, it is associated with lesser incidence of anemia. So it's not just, we can keep feeding people more and more cereals in the form of fortification, but the impact is not going to be as much as if we are able to diversify the plate. And this is the regression result. This is for dietary intake of iron with anemia, and that is dietary diversity with prevalence of anemia. And you can see that the diversity matters a lot more, or it's much more strongly correlated. In fact, if we take this to NSS region, because we have more observations there, the results only become stronger. You see the coefficients at far negative. Now, beyond the issue of how this rich data set can feed into a lot of these kind of health and nutrition policy, I want to spend exactly 2 minutes on data quality, because I think we are at a phase of growth and development when we do need good quality data. And this is not just a conversation which we are having in India. The BLS, including in the US, they are spending a great degree of effort trying to improve their survey data. As in fact, there was an article that came out saying household surveys are in crisis. It came out just 2 years back, and this is based out of the US data systems. It's telling you that surveys are now, the quality has to improve. And I think there was a very important work by Meng from Harvard Statistics Department. He's also the editor of the HDSR, who basically studied that when there were so many surveys and large surveys done, how come none of them were able to predict Donald Trump's victory? And then he said, well, there's something the matter with the way we are doing our surveys. Right? And that has spawned a literature on sampling and non-sampling errors. Right? Now, the data quality as far as in India is concerned, and my focus right now is, that is 11-12, rural-urban, and the bottom one is for 22-23. What do you notice? That the probability of substitution, meaning households refusing to do the survey, do you see that it is positively correlated with consumption class? Consumption class is in the x-axis. So richer households are more likely to refuse surveys. These are non-sampling errors, which means you can't just expand the sample size and improve your problem to expect it to go away. In fact, all of you know enough econometrics to appreciate that when we increase the sample size without taking care of some of these non-sampling errors, we are just going to end up with precisely wrong estimates, because your standard errors will keep falling as you keep expanding the sample size. But we are not taking care of non-sampling errors. This is telling us that this problem is not random. If it were random, then it is not a concern. But because it is systematically correlated with consumption class, which means richer and better off households are less likely to do surveys or respond, we are stuck with the problem, which we have to, and there is no obvious solution. There are many things we will have to try. Proportion of households with differing household size. This NSS is special because for the first time, there were 3 visits. For this HCES, the MOSPI team, or the team, the investigators visited the household 3 times in a year for 3 different segments of the questionnaire, and it was randomized. What you notice is that across 3 visits, does the household size, a very simple metric, we wanted to see, does it remain the same across all visits or does it vary? And you are seeing that in Rajasthan, around 5% of households reported different household size. In Kerala, that number is around 3.5%. So these are not insignificant numbers, that there is variation. What you also notice is that the proportion of households with differing respondents across the visits. Now, it's obviously, you will not find the same person every time you go. But that number is around 60% for Punjab, Haryana, Gujarat, Maharashtra. 60% of the time, you have a respondent who is different. And this is another concern, that over the last 4 NSS, we have looked at 93-94, 2004-5, 11-12 and 22-23. The proportion of households that are substituted, meaning households saying no to being surveyed, has only worsened with time. In fact, you see the green dots, the green estimates, they are for the latest, and it is getting worse. The problem is becoming worse. In fact, if you look at the odds ratio of substitution, then you will notice that in urban areas, and on the y-axis you have the decile groups. Richer households across all your surveys in urban areas have refused to do surveys. So this is not a random problem. This is non-sampling error, but it is not random. It is very systematically correlated with well-being, with development, with higher consumption classes. Now, I'm sure everyone here appreciates the problem that as the economy gets more developed, as you get richer, the difference between what the reality is on the ground and what we are able to pick up from this kind of very rich but data which still has non-sampling error, that gap is going to widen. We are only going to become more and more precisely wrong in our estimate. We are not taking care of the problem. In fact, in this particular, in the urban areas, the odds ratio are 2. It's more than 2. So richer households are twice as likely to refuse as poorer households. So with that, I bring this to an end. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take question if there is time.
Shamika, thank you for a very rich presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Now it's question time. I can sit here and look wise and leave all the answers to Shamika. So we'll take 5 questions at a time or 3 questions at a time. What do you prefer?
3, sir. I have short-term memory.
3.
Yes.
So we'll take 3 questions. There'll be several rounds. How much time do you have, Ram? 10 minutes. Okay, we'll take 2 rounds of questions. First 3. Please raise your hand. No questions? You're all convinced about... Oh, Mahendra.
Yeah, I have some comment on the data quality and also on the policies, the consumption patterns changes. Data quality, I was in the working group of this round. We deliberately took these 3 rounds because earlier we were taking the survey 2.5 hours for each household. So there is a fatigue in the end. So we thought that we should have food, non-food and all. So that's why we took. So that's why some comparability, your trends also get affected with that. We don't know how much effect of these 3 surveys and all. But on the other hand, in spite of that, I think there are significant improvements in consumption patterns, poverty decline, and inequality thing. So one has to see the data quality whether because of this thing. On the richer households, getting the survey and all, that has been there for a long time. I think TC also knows. The richer households are not able to give entire thing. But how much it affects this round or compared to others, we have to see that. On policies, I think Dr. Lahiri also mentioned MSP. I was chairman of CSCP earlier. So MSP is one of the things for the shifting the cropping patterns. For example, I used to increase pulses, oil seeds much more than the other one, but still there was no shift in the thing. So the other policies are needed. For value chains and, for example, milk, you don't have MSP, but value chains are quite good. So that is important. But on the malnutrition and healthy diets, yesterday I presented here these at the aggregate level, still 30% of the children are suffering from malnutrition, and about 60% are not able to have healthy diet. So how your results, what kind of policies are needed for this thing? Thank you.
Ram?
My question actually is motivated by what Mahendra Dev just said. Yeah, Shamika, the patterns that you have highlighted in changes in the consumption basket, they also get reflected in the supply side. With Ramesh Chand, I looked at the composition of the agriculture supply side. So to that extent, that's additional piece of evidence to corroborate. But it begs the question that to improve things, on account of nutritional deficiencies or to make the food basket better, what is the policy response? Should we focus on the consumer or the agriculture? I don't think what Professor Dev said that MSP is a solution. It is not a solution because the crops, the farm, the food items that have nothing to do with MSP, their shares have increased. For example, meat and egg, dairy products, they get minimal support, input support, and also output support. And they are the one they are responding to the demands and the market forces. So perhaps there might be, I would like your views that should we use more of market channel or MSP can play some meaningful role on this question?
Last question this round. Yeah.
Yeah, hi Shamika, a very interesting presentation. So my question is, you had mentioned in the beginning that expenditure on conveyance is rising and that's worrisome. But to my opinion, I feel that, maybe one is spending more on conveyance because one might be sending children to school in school more, yeah. Or women are working more and therefore, going out, spending on conveyance. So what's your take on that?
Okay. Before Shamika answers, let me make two comments. One, Professor Mahendra Dev, MSP, one issue that worries me, that we announce MSPs, but procurement is not there. It's only an announcement. So we have to be more careful. I think that MSP is on 28 products or 29 products. But if you see what are we procuring, because if you don't procure and guarantee that price through procurement, it doesn't mean much. And on conveyance, on a lighter vein, I'll tell you that I visited China many times. I'm a great admirer and want to learn from what is happening in China. So I went to the northern province of Gansu. No traffic at all. They've built beautiful 6-lane roads. So as an economist, or pretending to be an economist, I got worried about the cost-benefit analysis. So I asked some of the transport officials, why do you build these roads ahead of time and there is no traffic? They gave a beautiful answer. They gave the answer that we eat tomorrow's fruits today. I didn't follow what they were saying. They said they will build roads so people will buy cars. People will buy cars, so we'll get excise duty. We'll get duties from sale of petroleum products. So the conveyance, my take is, Shamika, that it has a lot to do with Gramin Sadak Yojana. Even the Chinese, when I kept on giving them goli, that you have done a wonderful job, they turned around and said, what nonsense are you speaking about? You have built the Gramin Sadak Yojana, village roads, and you have to go there and see it and believe it, that where there were no roads even 10 years ago, there are roads, which are not great, but at least you can travel. Shamika.
That the roads have become far, far superior, I think, even for the younger generation. You are seeing that, it's very visible. For my generation, and especially if you do field work and you travel across the country, the roads have transformed. And I think it is transforming lives of people even in the remotest. And I think in development economics, if there's one area where we have sufficient evidence to now believe that roads is an important pathway to development, right? To accessing markets, to being, just greater mobility, I think it's fantastic. And you only have to travel to the northeastern part of, like go to Nagaland. It used to take about 4.5 hours from Dimapur to Kohima. Today it takes about an hour, 20 minutes. And so I think that transformation is a good one. That's a good capex going into improving productivity of different kinds. I think, I agree with you. In fact, we don't know what is an equilibrium, what is a optimum conveyance amount that we should support. But the Chinese example is an interesting one because it looks like the Chinese are going the American way, that we are thinking of the car industry, the automobile, at the expense of public transport. And that is one lesson or one what not to do from the US economy in terms of infrastructure. So basically, I think moving forward, urban mobility, but also rural mobility, if you just look at how much households are traveling in terms of spending, we will have to spend greater amount of energy and time thinking of public transport. Because I think it's good that two-wheelers and three-wheelers and automobile sales are high. That's a very market way of looking at things and thinking that that's a good estimate of growth. It is, but it is not giving you an overall picture of what does it mean from a long-term perspective, which means we'll have to bring focus back squarely on public transport system, which means the rails, which means the intercity buses, etc., etc. Right? Ram's question is it's a difficult question, Ram, because, and of course this is an academic setup, so we can have some of these difficult conversations, that agriculture, just like many other parts of the economy, our real economy is actually growing, changing, far more dynamic than we are actually picking up in our data. Urban and urban growth is one of them. For instance, if you look at the last census, or if I ask you a question, how urban is India? The reflex answer we think of is 35%, or maybe it is 40%. But your satellite imagery, concentration of households, there are good case studies. Samastipur example, they tell you India is anywhere between 65 and 67% urban. So we are urbanizing much faster than what we are picking up through our data. Gurgaon is a good example. Till 2008, the millennial city of Gurgaon did not have an urban local body. It was being governed by panchayats. And that just tells you that our administration and governance and policy is actually at least a decade behind the actual growth on the ground. And I don't think agriculture is an exception to that rule. If households are consuming 2 kilo per person per month, that is the reduction in cereal consumption, even for the lowest quintile. Which means we will have to move away from rice and wheat. In fact, one of the reasons when I get asked, how long will Garib Kalyan continue? Well, just a few years back, we would read or we would see it on television, how metric tons of rice and wheat are rotting, or, the rats and the mice are eating, and all of that problem is sorted out because we are producing so much rice and wheat, and then we are procuring so much rice and wheat, it's better to give it away. But you're also, one other way to read it, you're also fiscalizing the rest of the consumption basket. What you are saving in terms of consumption on cereals, the decline from 14 to 5%, that's a massive decline. Where is that money going? It's going into everything else. And each of those growth will have implication, like the tobacco, intoxicants, pan. Your poorest 20% spends more on pan, tobacco and gutka than it does on education, if you looked at the data. Now these are some worrying trend, no? Or packaged food. Packaged food also, like the ICMR example we had, each item, how much micronutrient it has, it is coming out with these precise measures of kurkure, bread, and so every, the common food items, we are going to come out with these nutrients. Because this is a transformation which is unfortunately inevitable. Right? If you go to Taiwan, you will see many households don't have kitchens because people are not cooking anymore. You can get a lot of good quality food out in the market. This kind of growth patterns we will also be faced with. The issue is, what should be the policy recommendation? And if it's impacting health, which I'm sure it will, then we will have to have an adequate and a sort of appropriate response to that. And cereal and the MSP are very closely linked to that, because the government fixes MSP, it doesn't tell you how many, the quantity. So if we think about it in 20 years, if this pattern continues, our MSP can be fixed to whatever. But the government need not be procuring as much. Now, what does it mean for different regions of the country who are growing different crops? And I don't know how many of you know, but Bihar and Madhya Pradesh, two of our poorer regions, have seen the fastest diversification in agriculture without a very robust MSP support. So you're right, that I think there are states, there are parts of our country which are responding to these real changes, right, over and beyond the MSP. But MSP remains a very important instrument for farmer income and managing, and it's a political group as well, and the responses have to be political. I'm sorry, I forgot, there was one more question. So, you were there, sir. I mean, aapko main kya batau? I think data quality is a concern, and aapka jo last comment tha, that we will need to look at it. That's why we looked at the last 4 NSS. And the last 4 NSS, if you look at the decile groups, you are seeing in urban area across all the last 4 NSS, your richest, in fact it's a linear trend, the richest households are much less likely to respond. So this problem has remained, but it is getting worse. My problem, as somebody now who's thinking of iska policy implication kya hoga, I know that my data is not picking up the real growth and development on the ground. Now what do we do about it? And I think these are questions we should be all worried about, because, you know, I think there are areas of economics, and I think econometrics is one of them, Sir K.L. Krishna. We need to put a lot of economic research focus back on econometrics and statistics. I think somewhere down the line, we have all been playing with data sets, we are asking for more data, but somewhere we need to focus more on the sampling and non-sampling errors. Thank you.
Let me add 2 things, my take in my new incarnation. Now, first thing about supply or demand. Is it a demand problem? Is it a supply problem? What I have found, producing more is less of a problem than selling it. When you come to my constituency, I'll take you to a village. We can produce whatever you want. Good quality Black Bengal goat, now some desi variety of chicken, which is indigenous, fruits, vegetables. Where do you sell it? From a small village, selling it. So we need cold storage facilities, we need marketing chains where refrigerated vans will come, aggregate the commodities and give them a good price. So that resolution of that problem is a major problem, and I don't think the government can do it. I sometimes am surprised. There are some companies which have come up, but why the private sector is not coming to do that is, or they're not doing it as fast as they should, is a problem. Now, some of you must be, young students must be, I think even in my time or just after that, there were some things, some projects where you could go to the villages. You should go and see this. Which one is the bigger problem? Giving them good seeds, telling them how to produce, or selling it, bringing it to the market and getting them a good price. And the second is, on your micronutrients, Shamika, I have been to many what is called primary health center and Anganwadi centers. These girls, I was very skeptical about it, but some of the good Anganwadi centers are telling these girls that you should take this vaccine at this right time, you should feed this particular thing, giving them iron tablets. These are extremely important, and these should not be neglected. I'll make another point that is very important. Targeted intervention. I'm all in favor of helping the poor and the vulnerable. But how do you identify them? I'm a powerful person. I give income certification. On what basis? I found most people who come, they'll bring some certificate from a BDO or some panchayat member, because though I'm supposed to know, but how can I know 1.5 lakh people in my constituency? So I insist on some document. every family reports an income of 4,000 or 5,000 per month. And when I see them, I know it's not possible. So this, in sampling or in statistics, you have type 1 error and type 2 error. We are so much worried about excluding the poor, who should not be excluded, that we include some non-poor, who by any stretch of imagination should not be included. And that remains a burning problem. If we can't identify those guys who really need it, how do you intervene? Next round is the last round. Or if there is no compelling reason to have any more questions, only one more question. Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm Shekhar from IEG, Institute of Economic Growth. Your presentation very clearly brings out, which has been somewhat the trend in earlier rounds also, that the cereal consumption has gone down and those commodities which do not receive any price support, their consumption has actually increased. That clearly makes out the case that the price support policy is not in sync with the consumption patterns. That said, we also know that nearly 90% of the farming community belongs to the small and marginal, and they need some sort of a support. So do you think, your view on this, do you think the time has now come for us to move away from this price-based support to an income-based support, which can actually have minimal impact on the marginal production?
Shekhar, you and I agree on this. We have had successful experiments even within the country. The Raitu Bandhu was one form of it in Telangana. I think we have to also learn from what other big federal countries like China or the US have tried. I think we will gradually have to move towards an income support rather than price support, because it minimizes the distortions. Who am I to decide what you should produce? The job of the government ought to be to provide that minimal support and leave the rest of the decision to you to produce whatever it is that you want. So then the incentive compatibility is complete, where you produce what the market demands. So I think from a very simple first principles argument, I think gradually we have to move. And I think the agriculture community, the research community, we have to start writing and making a case for it. Not to say that we will succeed, but because it's not like the Farm Act, it had not been articulated for what, 40 years? So sometimes I think as researchers we also feel limited in the power we have to actually shape policies. But I think the more nuance there is and the greater degree of, I don't mean there will ever be a consensus, the idea of research is never true, but if empirically we are able to prove some of these things, here clearly diversity matters much more than fortification. Then we are moving towards perhaps what ought to be the future policies. So I think we should focus more on income support and we should write more on it. Thank you.
I think Ram, the director, is getting anxious. We should bring this rich discussion to an end. Shamika, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And as usual, Delhi School of Economics has provided a wonderful audience. Thank you.